What if a single object, something as small as a locket, held the key to uncovering a truth buried for 22 years? A mother's endless grief, a daughter's forgotten past, and a chance encounter that would change everything. Forever. Never, never, never give up. Eleanor Whitmore sat alone in the dimly lit study of her penthouse, staring at the same faded photograph she had held onto for 22 years. The image, though worn with time, still showed the radiant smile of a 5-year-old girl with golden brown curls, a delicate gold locket resting on her tiny chest. That was the last picture taken before Isabel vanished, before her world shattered beyond repair. Wealth, power, and influence. Eleanor had all of them. Her name was etched onto the skylines of major cities, her billion-dollar real estate empire spanning across continents. But what did it all mean if the one thing she truly desired had been stolen from her? Every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary day had been a cruel reminder of the daughter she had lost. The guilt never faded, nor did the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, Isabel was alive. She had hired the best private investigators, placed endless advertisements, and even offered a fortune as a reward. But Isabel had vanished without a trace. Some people told her to move on, accept the loss. But Eleanor refused. A mother's love does not yield to time. She would never stop looking. Tonight, a strange pull stirred in her chest, a whisper from the past urging her to act. It was the anniversary of Isabel's disappearance, and for the first time in over a decade, Eleanor felt an undeniable urge to return to the place she had been avoiding for years. California, the very city where Isabel was taken. The next morning, Eleanor boarded her private jet, the familiar skyline of Los Angeles growing larger in the distance. The memories hit her like a tidal wave. The park, the laughter, the moment she turned away for just a second. And then, the silence. Landing in the city, she drove aimlessly, the past weighing heavy on her heart. She had no plan, no destination. Maybe this was madness. Maybe hope was a foolish thing. But then, as she pulled onto a quiet street, her eyes caught something. A small, unassuming diner sat on the corner, its red neon sign glowing softly in the late afternoon light. Rosie's Comfort Kitchen. Something about it called to her, an inexplicable pull of fate. Eleanor parked her car and stepped inside. The warmth of chatter, the clinking of dishes, and the scent of fresh coffee greeted her. This was the kind of place she never would have visited in her world of 5-star dining and exclusive restaurants. But today, she wanted something different, something human. She chose a corner booth, one that gave her a clear view of the diner. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but then, as a waitress approached her table, her heart stopped. The girl looked to be in her mid-20s, her brown eyes kind but weary, her uniform slightly wrinkled but neat. There was something eerily familiar about her face, a sensation Eleanor couldn't explain. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the waitress said, pulling out a notepad. "What can I get started for you?" Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, but her voice caught in her throat. Her gaze had fallen to something glinting softly under the fluorescent lights. A gold locket, the exact same one she had given Isabel. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The locket. It was small, delicate, with intricate floral designs etched into its surface, an exact match to the one she had given her daughter 22 years ago. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her coat as her mind raced. Could it really be? Was this girl, this young waitress in an ordinary diner, wearing the very locket that once rested on Isabel's tiny chest? Number. It was impossible. She had been through this before. False hope. Over the years, Eleanor had seen girls who resembled Isabel, had followed rumors, had found nothing but disappointment. But something about this moment was different. The waitress smiled politely, tapping her pen against the notepad. "Ma'am," Eleanor forced herself to speak. "Just coffee. Black." Her voice sounded distant, barely her own. The waitress, her name tag read Ava, nodded. "Coming right up." As Ava walked away, Eleanor watched her closely, her pulse hammering. There was something about her posture, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she moved so effortlessly between tables. It was all so familiar, but it wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Could it? Eleanor needed to think. She reached into her handbag, her fingers trembling as she pulled out a small, worn envelope. Inside was a photograph, one she had carried with her for over 2 decades. It was faded at the edges, but the image was clear. A 5-year-old Isabel on her birthday, beaming with joy, wearing the same golden locket. She placed the photo on the table, staring at it, her chest tightening. When Ava returned, setting the steaming coffee down, Eleanor quickly slid the photograph beneath her palm. "Enjoy," Ava said with a polite smile before turning away. Eleanor's voice stopped her. "That's a beautiful locket," she said, forcing herself to sound casual. "Where did you get it?" Ava's hand instinctively flew to the pendant, her fingers brushing over the metal. She hesitated, a flicker of emotion passing through her face. "I've had it for as long as I can remember," Ava said finally. "It was a gift from my mom, or at least, that's what I was told." Eleanor's heartbeat pounded in her ears. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. Ava shifted uncomfortably. "I grew up in foster care. I don't remember my birth parents. The only thing I ever had from them was this locket." She smiled, but there was something fragile beneath it, something guarded. "It's special to me, you know. It's the one thing that makes me feel connected to something, to someone." Eleanor's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Foster care. Her Isabel had been in foster care all these years, alone, thinking she was abandoned. Her hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Ava wasn't just wearing Isabel's locket, she was Isabel. She had to be. The resemblance, the timing, the pendant, it all fit. But would she believe it? Eleanor took a breath, her voice shaking. "Ava, can you sit with me for a moment?" Ava hesitated, then glanced around the diner. It wasn't too busy, and something in Eleanor's expression made her pause. Sure," she said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Is everything okay?" Eleanor's fingers trembled as she reached for the photograph and placed it on the table. "Do you recognize this?" Ava's brow furrowed. She picked up the picture, studying it. Her fingers brushed over the image, the smiling little girl holding the locket. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Ava's breath hitched, her eyes widened. This little girl looks just like me when I was young," she whispered. Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's because it is you," she said, her voice breaking. "You're my daughter, Isabel." Ava froze, her fingers tightening around the photograph. The words hung between them, heavy, impossible. "My... what?" Ava whispered, her voice barely audible. Eleanor leaned forward, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might break free from her chest. "You are Isabel," she repeated, her voice shaking with emotion. "You are my daughter, my little girl. I've been searching for you for 22 years. Ava's hands trembled as she set the photograph down. This has to be a mistake," she murmured, shaking her head. "I don't have a mother. I don't have a family. I grew up in foster care. My parents, they abandoned me." Eleanor flinched. Abandoned? A fresh wave of anguish crashed over her. Someone had made Ava believe that she had been unwanted, discarded. It was a lie, a cruel, devastating lie. "No," Eleanor said, her voice firm despite the tears burning her eyes. "I never abandoned you. You were taken from me, stolen. I have spent every single day of my life searching for you, Isabel." Ava flinched at the name, as if it didn't belong to her. She looked away, her expression unreadable. "You have the wrong person," she muttered, standing abruptly. Eleanor panicked. "She can't leave. Not now. Not when I've finally found her." "Ava, please," Eleanor pleaded, reaching out. "Just listen to me." Ava shook her head, backing away. I can't." She turned and walked out of the diner, the bell above the door chiming as she disappeared into the cold evening air. Eleanor sat there, paralyzed. Her daughter had been right in front of her, and now she was gone. Again. Number. Not this time. She would not lose Isabel again. Eleanor wasted no time. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Detective Reed," a deep voice answered. "Reed, it's Eleanor Whitmore," she said quickly. "I found her, my daughter. She's alive." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Where are you?" "Los Angeles. A small diner called Rosie's Comfort Kitchen. I need you to find out everything about the girl named Ava, where she came from, who raised her. I want answers, Reed. I want the truth." "You got it," he said. "I'll be in touch soon." Eleanor ended the call, her fingers tightening around the locket in her palm. She wasn't leaving this city without her daughter. 2 days later, Detective Reed called back. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grim, "you're going to want to sit down for this." Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. "Tell me." "We ran a background check on Ava," he said. "Her legal records say she was placed in the foster system at age 5, under the name Ava Carter. The official file claims she was abandoned at a hospital with no identification, no birth certificate, no record of biological parents." Eleanor closed her eyes, fury building inside her. She had spent millions searching for Isabel. She had gone through every legal channel, hired countless investigators, and yet her daughter had been right here all along, hidden behind fabricated lies. "But there's more," Reed continued. "I dug deeper. Ava wasn't just abandoned. She was placed in the system by someone who had access to falsified records." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this wasn't an accident," Reed said darkly. "Isabel, Ava, was stolen from you and deliberately hidden. Someone wanted to make sure you never found her." The room spun around Eleanor. She gripped the edge of her desk, her breath short and ragged. Someone had taken her baby. Someone had stolen Isabel and erased her identity. "Who?" she whispered. "Who did this?" "That's what I'm working on," Reed said. "But Eleanor, this goes deep. Corrupt adoption agencies, people trafficking children for profit. Whoever did this, they wanted to make sure Isabel was never connected to you again." Eleanor's vision blurred with rage and grief. For 22 years, she had believed her daughter was lost to the world. But the truth was so much worse. Isabel had been alive this whole time, suffering, believing she was unwanted, while Eleanor had been desperate to find her. Someone had stolen 22 years from them, and now she was going to get them back. 22 years. 22 years of searching, of grieving, of believing that she had lost her daughter forever. And all this time, Isabel had been right here, growing up in foster care, believing she had been abandoned. She had been stolen, hidden, lied to. Someone had made sure Eleanor would never find her, and now she was going to find out who. Meanwhile, Ava sat on the rooftop of her tiny apartment, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the city skyline. Her mind was chaos. She didn't know why she had run out of the diner. Fear, confusion, anger. How could this woman, this billionaire, walk into her life and tell her that everything she thought she knew was a lie? She had spent her entire life believing she was unwanted, believing that her parents had thrown her away like she was nothing. And yet, something about Eleanor's words, the desperation in her voice, the way she looked at her, had made Ava's chest ache in a way she didn't understand. Was it possible? Could it really be true? She looked down at the locket resting against her skin, the only thing she had ever owned, the only thing that had ever felt real. She touched it gently, a strange memory flickering in her mind, something she had long buried. A woman's voice, soft and warm, humming a lullaby. A whisper. "You will always be my little girl." Ava's breath hitched. Had that been real? The next day, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Reed. "You were right," he said, his voice tense. "I found the man who handled Isabel's case in the foster system. His name is Walter Briggs, retired now. But back in the early 2000s, he was involved in multiple illegal adoptions, all covered up by fake paperwork. He has a history of placing children into the system, kids who weren't abandoned but stolen." Eleanor gripped the phone, her rage white-hot. "Where is he now?" Reed exhaled. "He lives just outside the city. I can get you an address." Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Send it to me, now." That evening, Eleanor stood in front of a small, run-down house in the suburbs. Her driver had warned her not to come here alone. She didn't care. She knocked, hard. A few seconds later, the door cracked open, and an older man with cold, lifeless eyes peered out. Eleanor's stomach twisted with fury. "You're Walter Briggs," she stated. The man narrowed his eyes. "Who's asking?" Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steel. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore. You took my daughter from me 22 years ago." Briggs's face remained blank, but his eyes flickered with recognition. Eleanor saw it, and in that moment, she knew. He remembered her. He knew exactly what he had done. For the first time in 22 years, she was standing face to face with the man who had stolen Isabel, and she wasn't leaving without answers. A mother's love doesn't give up, it doesn't fade, and it doesn't forget. The silence between Eleanor and Walter Briggs stretched like a drawn blade. 22 years. That was how long this man had stolen from her. How many birthdays, how many bedtime stories, how many moments of laughter had been erased because of him. Her fingernails dug into her palms as she fought back the rage burning inside her. Briggs stared at her, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, or maybe just recognition of the firestorm he had just stepped into. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, stepping back as if to close the door. Eleanor slammed her palm against it, forcing it open. "Don't lie to me," she said, her voice like ice. "I know everything. You stole my daughter. You placed her into the foster system under a false identity. You buried the truth, thinking no one would ever find out." Briggs exhaled through his nose. "You don't have proof." Eleanor's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You're wrong. I have everything. Records, old case files, and if that's not enough, I have a team of lawyers who will tear through your past like vultures on a corpse. Do you really want to test me?" Briggs visibly swallowed. He was cornered, and he knew it. "Why?" Eleanor demanded. "Why did you do it? Was it money? Power?" For the first time, Briggs's cold mask cracked. His shoulders sagged slightly, and he rubbed a hand over his face. "It wasn't personal," he muttered. "You don't understand how the system worked back then. Kids went missing all the time, and no one ever questioned it. Wealthy families paid good money for children they couldn't have. Isabel, your daughter, was just another name on a file." Eleanor's chest constricted. Just another name? Just another transaction? Her hands shook with fury, but she forced herself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help Isabel, wouldn't bring back the lost years. "You destroyed lives," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "And you will answer for it." Briggs sighed. "It's too late. What's done is done." Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "No," she said. "It's not too late, because I found her." Briggs's eyes widened slightly. "She's alive," Eleanor whispered, "and I will make sure she knows exactly what you did to her, what you stole from both of us." Briggs looked away, as if he couldn't face her any longer. For the first time, he seemed small, weak. Eleanor took a deep breath. She had gotten what she came for. She turned and walked away, leaving the man who had stolen everything behind her. That evening, Eleanor sat alone in her hotel suite, staring at her phone. She had sent Ava a message hours ago. She had told her the truth. She had given her every piece of evidence. But Ava hadn't responded. Her heart ached with uncertainty. Would Ava believe her? Or had she already lost her again? A knock on the door shattered the silence. Eleanor's breath caught. She rushed to open it, and there stood Ava. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy, as if she had spent the whole day crying. In her hands she clutched the photograph of herself as a child, the one Eleanor had given her at the diner. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Ava whispered something so quietly, Eleanor almost didn't hear it. "Tell me everything." Eleanor felt the dam inside her break. She pulled Ava inside, sitting her down on the couch, and for the first time in 22 years, she told her everything. About the kidnapping, about the search that never stopped, about the fake identity that had kept them apart. And Ava listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. When Eleanor finished, there were tears in Ava's eyes. "I wanted to hate you," Ava admitted, her voice shaking. "I spent my whole life thinking I was thrown away. But I think a part of me always knew that wasn't the truth, because I always felt like something was missing." Eleanor's hands trembled. "You were never missing, sweetheart," she whispered. "You were stolen, and I swear to you, I would have torn the world apart to find you sooner." Ava let out a shaky breath, staring down at the locket in her hands. Then she looked up. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked softly. Eleanor's heart swelled with emotion. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice breaking, "you never have to ask. You belong here. You belong with me." Ava hesitated for just a moment, and then, for the first time, she leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Eleanor in a tight embrace. Eleanor closed her eyes, holding her daughter, her Isabel, for the first time in 22 years. And this time, she would never let go again. The next few months weren't easy. Ava struggled to adjust to her new reality, to the idea that she wasn't alone, that she had a mother who had never stopped loving her. But slowly, things began to change. They spent time together, cooking, talking, learning about each other. One day, as they sat in Eleanor,